Hey guys, so here are the notes for 4.1. We are now going to be still in quadratics, but now we're going to be graphing quadratic functions. And today we're going to be graphing quadratic functions in standard form. Okay, so we need to talk about what is standard form. So it's going to be in this y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Now we've kind of already seen this standard form when we, anytime we had to solve for a quadratic. So you're going to see this. Know that a cannot be 0. If it is, that does not make this a quadratic function. So be careful with that. Now, basically, the word for the graph is called a parabola. Remember, a parabola makes a U shape. So you can have it up or facing down. Okay, so it makes a U shape. So we're going to go ahead and talk about how do we graph the parent function of the quadratic function. Okay, so the parent function is going to be f of x equals x squared, or it could be y equals. It doesn't really matter what you put there. Okay. Now, in order to graph these, we are going to be using an XY table here. So just kind of find some space onto your notes to draw this XY table. Okay. We're going to use the normal, basically, 5 points that we usually do. Okay. Now, usually we go from -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. Yes, we will use those. But how do we know we're going to use those? So here's how we are going to graph a quadratic function every single time. The first thing we need to do is find the x value of the vertex. To find the x value of the vertex, we are going to use this little formula. It's going to be opposite of b over 2a. Okay. So we look at our parent function here. We have our a value as 1. What would be your b value? Remember, that's going to be the number in front of the x term. Well, we don't even have an x term, so that's going to be 0. And we don't have a c term, which is the constant, and that's also going to be 0. So we have basically 0 over 2 times 1, which just gives us 2. Or it gives us 0, excuse me, okay? So now to find the y value of the vertex, we plug that 0 back into our function, which is just x squared. Okay, so we have 0 squared, which also gives us 0. So our vertex here is 0, 0. Now, to do the rest of the XY table, we're going to pick 2 x values that are smaller, 2 x values that are bigger. And so that's how we can use basically our 5 normal points of -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Now, we're going to plug these into our formula and solve. So I plug -2 into our x squared. So I get -2 squared, that gives me 4. I do -1 squared, that gives me 1. I do 1 squared, which gives me 1, and 2 squared, which equals 4. Notice here that the y values repeat. You should be seeing that because when we graph a parabola, because it's a U shape, the y values will repeat. And then you will have like this lonely point where the y value doesn't repeat. That's what we call the vertex. Okay, let's go ahead and plot these points. So I have 0, 0, 1, 1, and then 2, 4 here, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Now be careful, when we graph our parabolas, they are used, that means they need to be rounded. So don't make them sharp like an absolute value, they need to be rounded. Now, some other things we need to talk about first is called the axis of symmetry. This is going to be a vertical line that divides the parabola into mirror image. This vertical line passes through the vertex. And so it always is an equation of x equals, and it's going to be whatever our x value of the vertex. So in this case, it's going to be x equals 0. Okay, so it is a vertical line. And we talked about vertex. Now, to know this, vertex is either going to be your highest or lowest point on the graph. So whenever it's the highest, that means that your graph is actually going to open downwards. And when we have the lowest, that means our graph is going to open upwards. So we will either have a maximum or a minimum. Okay? So for the parent function, the vertex is at 0, 0. It faces up. That means our vertex is a minimum. Okay? Now, if our graph faces down, that's when we will have a maximum. So here we basically just talked about this stuff. So when the graph opens up, this is when our A value is positive, A is greater than 0. If it opens down, then our A value is less than 0. Now let's kind of go back to when we talked about absolute value. We talked about transformations. When it opens down, that's what we call as a reflection. Now we won't really use a lot of these words in this and when we're in standard form, but we can at least talk about it. Now, if the graph stretches, that means it gets nearer, and that happens when our absolute value of A is greater than 1, and it shrinks, meaning it gets wider when we have the absolute value. So remember, if it shrinks, that's a vertical shrink, okay, and vertical stretch. We talked about axis of symmetry. That's always going to be the x equals whatever the x value of your vertex is, and to find the x value of your vertex, you're going to do opposite of B over 2A. The last thing that we didn't really talk about is what we call the Y-intercept. So this is where basically the graph crosses, well, the y-axis. To figure this out, it is always going to be the point of 0, C. Now, what is C? That is going to be when we are in that standard form. Whatever this C value is, that's going to be part of our Y-intercept. The reason being is that if we plug 0 back into those x's, they get rid of our A and our B terms, and we're just left with C. Okay, make sure you watch the next few videos, and we're going to graph quadratic function.